So recently, I was fortunate enough to have the opportunity of visiting the Ubisoft Bordeaux studio in, you guessed it, Bordeaux, who as we know are the creators of Assassin's Creed Mirage, the Mirage DLC that got announced, and also the upcoming Claws of Awaji DLC for Assassin's Creed Shadows. Whilst I was there, I got to play around 3 hours of the Claws of Awaji DLC, and also record some footage to share with you. Now, 3 hours is not nearly enough time to fully gather all of my thoughts. In fact, I was thinking of not making this video just because there was barely enough information and gameplay to process. However, I thought screw it. I'll just share my thoughts on the very limited time I played and experienced. Now, I just want to make it clear, being invited to the Bordeaux studio does not mean I'm going to sugarcoat anything. I will always share my honest thoughts with you, good or bad. Now, don't worry, there won't be any major story spoilers for the DLC, but there will be spoilers relating to the end of the base game story. So if you haven't played Assassin's Creed Shadows base game, then I highly recommend watching this after or some other time. So with all of that said, let's get into it. One of the big questions and even assumptions about this DLC is whether the story would focus on the Templars arriving at Awaji Island, or perhaps the Black Cross, or maybe even some First Civilization storyline. Well, sadly that's not the case, or at least that's not the case based on what I played. For all I know, there could be some First Civilization plot near the end. Now, this DLC plays things very safe and leans into familiar territory, though that's not necessarily a bad thing. From what I played, and from what I've heard through another creator who interviewed the developers, story-wise, yes, there is somewhat of a Templar presence, but it's far from the main focus, and that developer said don't expect too much. So yeah, don't go expecting this entire DLC's plot to consist of a classic Assassin vs Templar plot. Based on the 3 hours that I played, it's far from that. But like I mentioned, there is still a Templar presence nonetheless. The story takes us to Awaji Island, which sits just off mainland Japan in the game. It picks up right where the base game's ending left off. As you remember, the ending was pretty open. We see the sun setting, Naoe receives a letter from Hattori Hanzo saying he has a lead on her mother Tsuyu, and then the credits roll. That's exactly where this DLC begins, with Naoe travelling to Awaji Island in search for her mother Tsuyu. Now, in the base game, the main targets were the Shinbaku, but in this Claws of Awaji DLC, the focus shifts away to the Sanzoku Ippa, a group of 4 members. And since this is a DLC, Ubisoft Bordeaux had the chance to give more attention to these characters, and honestly I think they did a good job with these 4 characters. From what I played, the Sanzoku Ippa felt much more fleshed out and a lot more unique compared to the generic Shinbaku. In fact, their boss fights, or however you want to call it, are not basic whatsoever, where it's just a 1 versus 1 fight. For example, one of the fights against one of the Sanzoku Ippa members takes place in a literal stealth arena, and this arena will contain traps and dummies where the focus is entirely on stealth and being subtle, with no combat involved at all. It's super creative and a nice change of pace. Now, during the studio presentation at Bordeaux, they even mentioned that Metal Gear Solid 3 and 5 were the big inspirations for that particular fight, and if you played any of those games, then it really shows. Now, from here I won't dive into spoilers, so instead I'll move on to my overall thoughts about what I played. Now, one positive thing I noticed is how the DLC handles both Yasuke and Naoe. You see, in the base game, whenever you picked one of them for a mission, the other would basically vanish, let's be honest. But based on what I played, which again is not much at all, it feels like Ubisoft Bordeaux has found a way to make both of them matter in the same mission. For example, early on you infiltrate a castle as Naoe, and when something happens inside that castle, the game then switches over to Yasuke to continue on. There's also a section where Naoe lowers a drawbridge for Yasuke while he protects her. It's the kind of dynamic I really expected to see in the main game, which wasn't really the case here. But here in this DLC, it really leans into their chemistry, and it makes them feel like a proper duo, much more than before. I shall play out. One thing I really liked about this story is that it feels more linear compared to the base game. In the main story, you could tackle certain targets in any order, and that kind of hurt the storytelling since it stopped the protagonist from being fleshed out properly. In Claws of Awaji though, the path seems more focused, where it's one way and one way only. Because the story centers on the 4 Sanzoku Ippa members, it gives the Ubisoft Bordeaux writers more room to dive into them instead of spreading the story too thin. In fact, when you play this DLC, you are definitely going to notice that this is a Ubisoft Bordeaux project and not a Ubisoft Quebec project, because a lot of things feel more focused and linear. Now, there is a really creative storytelling moment in this DLC that I'm unfortunately not allowed to show or go into detail about, which is a bit odd. It's a shame too, because what I wanted to talk about is honestly one of the biggest highlights of this DLC, but since I can't, we'll just move on. Now, the last thing I want to touch on relating to the story is the mocap and the cutscenes. If you watched this video where I go over my 100-hour thoughts, you will know that I was not exactly happy with the cutscene quality and the motion capture there. In this DLC though, I actually noticed a positive. From what I played, there seems to be a fair amount of mocap in the cutscenes. Is it a lot? No, it's still a Ubisoft game, and you can tell some parts look outdated, but compared to the base game where mocap felt definitely rare, it is definitely more noticeable here. Now, I could be wrong since Assassin's Creed games and DLCs often start very strong and then taper off. But again, I have to go based on what I saw in my 3 hours I played. I did also notice that the standard generic cutscenes seemed more refined and less robotic, which you can tell they've been working on that aspect since the base game. So that's always good. Also, I played with the Japanese dub, which in my opinion is absolutely the right way to experience this game and DLC. So I recommend you 100% do the same. So yeah, those are pretty much my early story impressions. I know I didn't cover a ton in this segment, but that's mainly because I only had access to 3 hours and a very limited amount of the story. But from what I did play, it's pretty solid. Nothing groundbreaking, but it plays it safe in some areas while also being surprisingly creative. Now let's talk about Awaji Island itself. Since I only played around 3 hours, I didn't get to see the whole island, but I'd say I explored around 30% of it. From what I saw, it feels very similar to the base game's world, with just a few environmental differences. Now don't expect Awaji Island to look completely unique compared to mainland Japan. A lot of the landscapes and environments are reused. One thing that carried over from the base game, which I'm not a fan of, are those big unclimbable hills that you just end up sliding down. They're still here, and it got me thinking, is Assassin's Creed Shadows really an open world game if you can't go anywhere freely, but are instead funneled down certain paths? That's exactly how I felt playing this DLC, because to get from one destination to the next, I was forced to follow a path and I couldn't veer outwards because of those unclimbable surfaces. But it's not all bad. This DLC has a very strong focus on traps. Since Nawe and Yasuke are the hunted this time, and not the hunters, and the Senzoku Ippa are after us, the island feels a lot more dangerous. You'll come across campsites and areas that are best avoided, because the enemies here do not mess around at all. There are tripwire traps everywhere that trigger poison or smoke bombs, and shinobi just waiting in the bushes ready to ambush you. It's quite relentless, and honestly, it's more challenging than anything in the base game. You can't just ride from point A to point B without running into danger. As for side content, well, this is where it falls short for me. The side content in Claws of Awaji, based on what I saw, which again is 3 hours only, is basically the same as the base game. You've got your Kujikiri stuff, your shrines, your kata, and all the usual activities. Nothing new, which is a bit disappointing. I was hoping for at least something fresh or innovative, but sadly it feels like mostly filler. The side quests are also structured the same way. As we know in the base game, they were called People of, and then whatever region you were in. And here in the DLC is People of Awaji. Now for some reason they did not let us record side quests, which I find quite strange, but I did play one, and it was about a retired warrior that we run into as Yasuke. And out of respect, that warrior asked for a duel to still see if he has what it takes. And to be fair, he does. The fight is pretty good. The quest ends with you getting his legendary weapon. It was a solid little quest, but very short since it's just that one fight and nothing more. I think that's the area Ubisoft really needs to improve on. When you look at DLCs for other open world games like Blood and Wine, Phantom Liberty, or even Iki Island in Ghost of Tsushima, it's clear that Ubisoft is still far behind in terms of meaningful content. Right now they're getting left in the dust, and if they ever want to keep up, that is something they seriously need to fix. They need to move away from the safe formula that they invented and start innovating in storytelling and quality over quantity, because the side content in this DLC is nothing good at all. It's just padding. So when this DLC is promoted as 10 hours of content, I now see why. On a more positive note, the biggest highlight of this DLC for me is the new weapon, the bow staff. The developers showed us the process of how this bow staff was implemented, and I was quite impressed with the amount of effort that went into it, from the motion capture for Nawe's animations to the design ideas behind it. After using the bow staff, I can confidently say that it's my new favorite weapon in the whole game. It has way more depth than any of the other weapons we've seen so far. You've got a new skill tree with new abilities, and it changes your playstyle quite a lot. So for example, instead of just light attacks and heavy attacks, which you can still do, the bow staff lets you pair those with posture attacks. These come in high, medium and low variations, each with a different effect. A high posture attack will stun an enemy and interrupt their moves. Medium posture knocks enemies back, giving you space to breathe. And low posture, which is my favorite, lets you knock enemies to the ground and follow up with a ground attack. Now you can mix these postures together and it makes the combat feel more engaging, since it pushes you to think about your approach instead of just spamming attacks like you can do with pretty much every other weapon. Oh, and also this weapon, when just spamming attack, does not really do much damage at all. So the whole appeal of it is you have to mix and match different attacks with different postures. On top of that, there are 3 new abilities for the bow staff, and they're all pretty decent to be fair. The first ability is called Wind Step, which boosts the staff's reach, speed and impact, making it great for handling groups. Though I will say it feels a bit broken since the effect lasts way too long. Hopefully they can fix that before the DLC is released. The second ability, Grab and Throw, looks fantastic. You catch an enemy with the staff and fling them into another enemy and deal about 70% ability damage. And the third and final ability is called Flurry of Blows, and this one does exactly what it sounds like, a rapid combo of 5 strikes, each hitting for 20% ability damage. Plus there are new finishers tied to the weapon too. So overall I think it's a really fun addition to this DLC that a lot of people will enjoy. And that pretty much wraps up this very short video. Huge thanks to Ubisoft Bordeaux for giving me the opportunity to check this out. Like I said a few times in this video, in fact I said it plenty of times, I only had about 3 hours with the DLC, which was not enough time to go off at all. I wish we had more time to really dive deeper and process more, but they played it safe and only let us experience a small portion. From what I did play though, I think this DLC is going to be good. Not groundbreaking, not revolutionary, but a solid 7 out of 10. More importantly, I think this DLC could be the piece that will tie everything together from the base game's ending and finally conclude the main story of Assassin's Creed Shadows. So yeah, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that subscribe button, and I will see you in the next one.